Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, mostly because I'm impatient, and I always say that this webinar won't take the full hour. But then I also know how I talk, and I get talking about something, and I feel really passionate about it. It's something I really want to talk more about or dig deep on, and so I talk more than I plan to. So thank you for joining us. Today we are going to be talking about standards 5 and 6, which cover service philosophy and then family focused approach to service. First couple slides here are just going to be, you know what, I need to run the webinar or run the slideshow, don't I? There we go. Are just going to be kind of our things that we cover in general at the beginning of every webinar, just so we are all on the same page about what we mean when we say policy and procedure. They aren't the same thing. They have two very, kind of similar applications and meanings, but they're not exactly the same thing. So your policy is going to be very broad in nature. It's that general guiding principle talking about what or why, sometimes maybe how, and it rarely changes. The policy would look very similar to what the standard themselves perhaps look like, or it could be different, but we find a lot of times it does end up looking kind of like the standard. And that's okay for the policy to be that way. Generally, policies are approved by the board or some kind of larger function like a supervisor, manager, program director, something like that. Oh, got another one. There we go. And then your procedures are more narrow in application. They're those specific details and those processes and protocols and how you do them, when you do them, who does them, sometimes where they're done. All of those specifics that a person would need to go to do their job. If they come in and they start a job brand new, it's the details, like where something's documented, who's involved in a discussion, where a person might go to make a referral on something, like if on a particular topic, like what are the kind of those referrals in the program look like. Those are prone to changes. They're probably going to change more often. And those are where, you might find a need to make a tweak in something. Maybe something isn't working quite right, and you need to tweak that procedure to make sure that it is really meeting your service philosophy. Those usually don't need board approval. Again, that's kind of up to every program and how they want to do that, but typically don't need the board approval. And then kind of as we go through things today and all of our future webinars, when we are talking about procedure and how to really like key in and really make those what you're presenting for the Iowa Family Support Credential, kind of that really high level of detail that you need to provide the peer reviewers with, that's going to have this logo, this IFSTAN procedure boost on it. And really that's just, like I said, that's kind of that you're going the extra mile, you're documenting things in procedure, which is not necessarily required right now, but procedure is really important because, those are the questions the peer reviewers really want to know about. They want to know how you do something. They want to know when to expect to see it in the files, where to, see it, what kind of documentation do you do on it? What does that form look like? How often should they see it? All of those things. And so, if you don't put those things in there, the peer reviewers are going to need to ask that, and, their questions and things like that. And so if you can get that on paper, that's great. That's, I always say a lot of things exist up in my head and I need to get them on paper. And so it's kind of like if I won the lottery and wasn't in this job, tomorrow, where would all of that information live? And that's kind of the same thought here is, if the supervisor wasn't there, or, all your family support staff, you had to hire new people, how would they know all of those little details? And then the other thing we're going to cover just very briefly is a requirement for programs to have these revision dates on all of their policies. Well, it's not required unless you want to go through the expedited process if your program becomes eligible at some point. It's required. It has to be there. There has to be a method by which programs are tracking when policies are reviewed or revised. Well, mostly revised, but reviewed kind of has another purpose in some of the other standards. But We want to make sure that programs are tracking that. There's one of two ways to do that, and I've kind of got both ways on here. You can have this top way, this where it says procedure name, applicable to, effective date, dates of revision, like that can be at the top of all of your policies, something similar to that. And then every time you revise it, you just add, the next date onto the end. Or you can keep like this bottom version down here is like an Excel spreadsheet where you keep track of like the name of the policy, the date that it was effective, and then all of those subsequent revision dates. And that eliminates the need to actually put it on the policy itself, whichever way works best for your program and organization. I have seen it done both ways in practice, and both ways work equally well. The only kind of caveat is this bottom way where you have it in a separate spreadsheet. You have to remember to do it. You have to remember to update that. And, sometimes I know that for me, the more things I have to remember, the less likely it is I'm going to remember. Anyway, moving on. I just wanted to make sure everybody had that information, because I don't want a program to be all ready to go through an expedited renewal and then be like, oh, but we didn't do that. So standard 5, service philosophy. I will kind of start my conversation about standard 5 by saying, I think this is the standard that, in terms of the program standards, the littlest amount of attention is paid to, but probably we ought to pay the most amount of attention to it. So I'll go into some details on that here, but just kind of keep that in mind. Like, I think that we just don't think about this standard enough, but I think it's huge. So the standard itself, the program is guided by a service philosophy that sets forth a logical approach for how program activities and interventions will meet family needs, and guides the development and implementation of program activities and services based on the best available evidence of service effectiveness. So, that's a lot of words in there, and a lot of, kind of higher level thinking words. It's not really like you got to do this, this, and this. There's not like a clearly defined list of everything. So we're going to really break it down here. First, and probably the question we would probably get the most on this is, what is a service philosophy? And so, as you might know, or you maybe don't know, but the Iowa Family Support Standards are based on the Council on Accreditation standards. So Council on Accreditation is a set of standards that a lot of larger social service agencies, non-for-profits, things like that provide services to families and children have to go through or choose to go through to kind of, make sure that they're doing the best and encompassing best practices in all of their work. And COA does, when it goes out and compiles all the data on all kinds of research and things like that, and then uses that to compile their, best practices. So the Iowa Family Support Standards pulls from those with their permission. And so the definition that they use for service philosophy is this theoretical framework that describes and explains an organization's approach to service. And even still, that's not crystal clear to me necessarily exactly what that means. So we'll break it down. I think it's easier for me to think first about what a service philosophy is not. And we see a lot of times, I think that's probably a big part of a big source of confusion among a lot of programs. It's not a mission statement. This isn't like, this is what we want to do. It's not a value statement. It's not really even one single statement. If your service philosophy says, we serve children age 0 to 5 to help, or we serve families with children age 0 to 5 to help them become ready for school. It's a service philosophy. That's not it. A service philosophy is so much more than that. And really, when it's done with a lot of thought and planning and data, really should be what drives the entire program moving forward. And really every interaction with every family, everything, it's really just every piece of work that you do with a family, and everything that the program does, even from more of a like budgeting standpoint or community collaboration, things like that all will tie into service philosophy. So I have the definition again here, mostly because I wanted to have it in both places. But you know, to dig into it a little bit more, it's an outline by which an organization can move towards, or program can move towards closing the gap between where they want to be, which is kind of their mission, and where they are today. So it's like, here's where we want to be. Here's our very end goal. You can't see me, but I'm like pointing with my hands. And here's how we're going to get there. And it's not just like on one topic necessarily. Maybe it's on several different things. Maybe there's lots of different things you're looking to do within your community, with families. You know, it could be a couple of different things that you're gonna, you know, be working towards. It identifies how that program will use its assets, resources, and program activities to promote desired outcomes, and then have its intended effect. So I know all programs have outcomes that they're reviewing, and that maybe their funders require, maybe it's something that the organization as a whole requires. But this is kind of that promoting the outcomes, but then it's also reviewing them, making sure you have data to track them. You know, it's how do you know that you're doing what you said you were going to do? And then concisely demonstrates an organization's commitment to quality improvement efforts at the program level. So if you kind of think about it, organizations have strategic plans, larger organizations, and we talk about that in Standard 26, which is an organizational standard, that strategic plan, you know, bringing in all of the stakeholders, and really, what does the organization want to do? You can almost think of a service philosophy as that strategic plan or a logic model, you know, for the individual program. And I know a lot of programs have these, mostly because we see them in Standard 26 as evidence a lot of times. So I know that programs are doing the work. I think that, you know, and I think that it's not that it's missing, it's just kind of that lack of understanding what a service philosophy is. And I'll be really honest, until I started digging in on this one, I didn't 100% understand that strategic plan for organizations and service philosophies, or logic models is probably more the word that we see becoming more and more prevalent, and probably see more often now. Service philosophies is a bit an older terminology, but still relevant. All right. Okay, so as we begin to kind of think about what a service plan or service philosophy might look like, if you were going to build one from scratch, or you had, it occurs to me that you can't see the very bottom of these screens. Hold on just a second. That is annoying. And I don't know how to fix that. Well, I'll just leave it in this view, and then you can see what's coming too, I suppose. So as we talk about getting, you know, building one, if we had to start one from scratch, which I don't think, you know, anybody's in that position necessarily, because most programs already kind of know where they're at and where they want to go with things. But if you had to get one down on a piece of paper, you kind of might start by thinking about throughout your entire program, and maybe even, you know, and bringing in some information outside your program. What are the outcomes that the program hopes to achieve? What's your things that are clear out there, the things that you want to work on? And then what is, you know, your ultimate impact that you think that the program is intended to have? What is that kind of long-term thing? Again, another way of thinking about it. And then how are you going to utilize your assets and your resources to get there? It's almost parallel to the work we do with families when we do our goal planning or service planning with families. It's kind of like, you know, and then when you sit down with a family and they tell you their very long range goal, you know, like, I didn't graduate college, or I didn't, you know, go to college, I want my kid to go to college. Okay, your kid's 6 months old. What are we going to do now about that? And that's kind of how you could start to think about your strategic or your service philosophy as well, as maybe have those long-term goals, but maybe you break them down into smaller chunks, and then how do you start using your assets and your resources to get there? Some of the things that you can think about as you really dig into it a little bit deeper, the needs that you want to address, the available, and that's probably a pretty key word there, human, financial, organizational, and community resources. So those are the inputs. Those are the things that would go into that service philosophy. And then those program activities that are intended to bring about the desired results. That is the piece that is probably like driving everything else that you're doing, those program activities are not just one thing. It's not just two things. It is literally, it's everything you do with the family, everything you do, even, with funders, with your community partners, it's everything. And then, your outputs are going to be the size and the scope of the services that were delivered. This is what we did. We had, 200 home visits this year, or whatever that looks like. And then the desired outcomes. Those are the changes that you would expect to see. So that those end results. And that would be your kind of completed, and then you want to tie into there the long-term impact of the organization, community, or system. So those are important. That's an important piece to consider in there. There's long range things, but it doesn't, oh golly, hold on just a second here. When I get a new email, my computer sometimes does this where it gets all fuzzy. So those are the things to consider. And those all came from, I have it cited down here, those all came from COA as well. They do a really good job of breaking down service philosophy and logic models in a way I think that makes sense to me and hopefully makes sense to other people as well. So we'll move on to standard 6, which is family focused approach to service. And initially when I said we were going to do standard 5 and standard 6 together, I thought, well, they're not really the same topic. But as I started digging in, I was like, yeah, kind of they are. Because standard 6 is really the very beginning stages. I'll dig into go to the 6th one, is really the starting point for the program's philosophy in terms of, those everyday interactions with families, what that looks like, how that kind of starts, and really where it could either you kind of set up for success, or maybe you set up for maybe things don't go so well. Maybe some of the things that we talk about later on in standard 6, aren't as prevalent as they need to be. And so they could ultimately impact, the success of a family. So, sorry, I had to take a drink of water. As we go into standard 6, just a couple of things I want to point out that are things we want to define up ahead in front. We reference supervisor throughout all of the standards. And it's really important for us to point out that the supervisor is whoever the program decides the supervisor is. If Stan isn't going to tell you who the supervisor is in any situation, that's something the program decides. And it's also important to know that some programs have different setups. There's lots of different setups for how that supervision looks. It might be that a family support professional would have one supervisor for, hold on just a second here, would have one supervisor for the administrative roles, like the hiring and the firing and the like vacation requests and maybe any possible disciplinary actions or things like that. And then another supervisor for those day-to-day programmatic activities, like the work with the families. It's probably becoming more the case that happens. So programs totally get to decide that. And it's important for us to say that up front. The other piece is on 6.02. We refer to family members. And in that case, the family members are determined by those individual families. And it could include, when we say family members, it doesn't necessarily mean somebody who's biologically related to them, or even like within that, more nucleus family, or nuclear family. Could include significant others, close friends, current or former foster families, adoptive families, and even just anyone important to that family in supporting them. And sometimes, who somebody defines as a family member, it might change. And that's okay. We can be flexible with those, with the families we work with and who they define their family as. And like I said before, standard 6 is really the starting point for the program's service philosophy. Strong policy and procedures and approaching service in a family focused manner is instrumental to the outcomes desired for service philosophy. So standard 6.01, pretty simple. Families and providers establish respectful relationships that facilitate productive service planning and delivery. So as a standards, a person who reads policy and procedure all day long, and and standards and that kind of thing, I look at this and I say, wow, that sounds really subjective. How do you measure a respectful relationship? How do you measure productive service planning and delivery? Like, what are the quantifiable things there? And how would a peer reviewer look at that? It's just so subjective. So, programs, when they're doing that, the more that you can define that in policy and procedure, and like, this is what this means to us, the better you're going to be at this. Because the last thing you want to have happen is, that you, your policy is something similar to this, where it's kind of, it doesn't say exactly what you mean. It is very subjective, and that the peer reviewers look at that and say that doesn't mean a respectful relationship to me, or that doesn't mean that you're productive in your service planning and delivery. And for them to say, I just don't think this meets the standard, and rate it out of adherence. So the more you can really nail that down for the peer reviewers and tell them, this is what I mean by this, the more successful the standard and the policy will be for peer review. So first, I really want to dive into that respectful relationships. What is a respectful relationship? What does it look like in family support? So this is me kind of giving you some things to think about, and then the role that for programs would be, to address some of these things in your policy, or maybe even, some of these things might make sense to word in your policy. You could use some wording from some of this if you wanted to. So respectful in terms of family support, what it would look like with a family support professional would include like sensitivity to the willingness of the family to be engaged, using non-threatening manners, respecting a person's autonomy and confidentiality, flexibility and persistence. I would add another one in there. And maybe this is just the supervisor in me, but I think that the other one is like, respect means to me like honoring your commitment to the family and doing what you said you were going to do. So, if you have a meeting or if you have a visit scheduled at 1 p.m., being there at 1 p.m., or, things come up, but making sure that you're contacting them, not just showing up at 1:30 and being like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, without even telling the family what was going on. I think it's respecting their time is a huge and easy way. It's big, it's important. It's also easy to do, to gain that, or to make sure that the family knows this is how I'm showing I respect you. And also it kind of helps set that expectation for like, this is our time for our visit, and maybe put some priority on it, I suppose. But again, that sensitivity to the willingness of the family to be engaged. Not every family you sit down with at your first visit is going to be super thrilled and excited for the program. Maybe they still need some time to think about it, or they're really kind of unsure, so they don't open up right away about things. But being sensitive to that and understanding that could happen. And the other piece then is that productive service planning and delivery. What role does the family support professional play in that? Excuse me, sorry. And this is really, I thought these were good. These also, I pulled from a couple different places for some of these that I'd looked at, some other things, but these are all really good examples of ways that family support professionals can be kind of, can guide conversations. So helping family members develop a vision of what they want, encouraging family members to explore their own reasons for making positive choices and changes, helping family members consider pros and cons of different choices. So like, when the family chooses, or thinks that this is an appropriate child developmental thing for a child, maybe helping that family, get them some information, helping them decide for themselves that maybe that's not maybe appropriate for the age that child is right now, or rather than just being like, no, that's wrong. Your child really shouldn't be walking at 8 months, or whatever it is. Um, but like allowing the families to explore that and kind of come to their own conclusions. Also helping the family members see how services can help them, highlighting past successes and strengths with family members so that they can draw on those when they're trying to make a change. And then the one at the end is a big one. And I don't think that I don't think the family support professionals do this. This isn't why we get into the line of work, but sometimes even the smallest of comments can come across this way as, be avoiding argumentative or blaming strategies that might prompt the family members to withdraw or become defensive. Obviously, that's not productive for service planning and delivery, but it's also not productive in a respectful relationship as well. So your policy and your procedure, should really kind of use some of these things to describe to family support professionals, to the peer reviewers. What does your program mean by respectful relationship? What does your program mean by productive service planning and delivery? What does that look like for you guys? And I'll move on, maybe. Did I just go 1, 2? Okay, that's right. Okay. So I kind of summed some of this up in these tables. I like these tables because tables make sense to my brain. And I thought maybe there's somebody else out there whose brain works that way as well. So kind of that, we've talked about it, respectful relationship. Those descriptive words I think is really important to tie back to like policy and procedure. So how and who would be kind of the ones we're talking about here. Describing the approach. So in your procedure, you would really want to, in order to kind of boost that procedure and make sure everything's documented, describe the approach family support professionals take to establishing and maintaining a respectful relationship. And then describe how the supervisors monitor this and ensure there is a good match between family support professional and family. Not always do programs have the ability to, that match doesn't work out, that family support professional and that family it's not really working, let's maybe try somebody else. That's not always an option. Sometimes there's only one worker per county, or maybe the other worker is full. Totally get that, but it is still something that the supervisor should be monitoring, and making sure that even if you kind of sense like maybe that's not a good fit, but there are no other options, like then that becomes a supervision strategy. How do you work with that staff member, working with that staff member during supervision so that you can grow grow the skills of that staff member to maybe, challenge themselves a little bit and learn some new strategies on working with with families that are a bit different or challenging. And, just generally continuing the process of supervision with that staff member. Also, though, a lot of programs do observations. They'll observe a home visit, or if there are parent groups that are part of the a home visitation program, then observing the parent groups and kind of checking in on dynamics between staff and families there, and then using that as a tool, using those observations as a tool to coach the family support professional going forward. I think those are huge. And then other places you might see some of this documented is contact notes that describe the conversation between the family and the family support professional. And then again, I would just highlight that contact notes should contain statements of fact and not interpretation. Leanne and I read a lot of contact notes, and I think for the most part, they're very factual and that kind of thing. We do see sometimes where I don't think that people mean for it to come across as an interpretation, or a judgment, but you just have to make sure that you're documenting, this is what was said, this is what was done, this is what, using your 5 senses, and not interpreting, something that the family did to mean a certain other thing. And then also that respectful relationship, it goes both ways. So sometimes there'll be a conversation about that at enrollment, and the families will sign something acknowledging their rights and responsibilities. where it says like, these are the things the family support professional is going to do. These are the things the family is going to do. So that might be another place where you address respect, especially on the family side of things, like turning the television off when the visit's taking place, or whatever that might look like. And then on the family support professional side, it might be getting to the visit on time, or it could be a lot of things. All right, moving on to 6.02. The standard is right up here, and I'm doing things I don't mean to. Services involve and accommodate all family members to the extent possible and appropriate, and are provided at times acceptable to the family. So we've got two pieces there. But they're pretty simple. Family members, who, again, we talked before, that's defined by the family, and it should be. And so in policy and procedure, we would want to see that addressed. And then we would want to talk about, like, how does that conversation go? When does that conversation happen? Is it happening at enrollment? Is it happening at like the next couple visits? Like, what is that? It should be happening at the very beginning, that. Okay, so, we're talking about our visits, how frequently they want to be, who do we want to make sure is involved, in the visits, and then scheduling around them, obviously. So if it's important for the, say the primary caregiver is a, mom and a dad, if it's important for dad to be there as well, then making sure we're capturing that, and we know that, making sure we're asking it really, and just not just assuming, but then also, choosing times for home visits that work for that, who the family decides they want to have there. And I know it's not always going to be possible. We've got all kinds of different situations that could play out. But generally speaking, we want to make sure that the times are chosen to accommodate family schedule, and other needs that they might have. Maybe having an opportunity for an evening or weekend as needed, and defined definitely by the way that the organization is set up and the program is set up. But then also, considering nap time, back time. Sometimes I know it was always hard to schedule a home visit or to do a home visit with a family that had older children, that would, like, school age children, when they were home in the summer. So maybe finding a way that you could make something work there, being flexible. And then, the interpretation does say the organization can consider factors such as staff availability and safety when deciding the hours and services that will be offered. Absolutely, that's true. I was a family support worker in Davenport, and during the summer, or during the winter when it got dark earlier, there were parts of Davenport that I didn't want to be out in after dark. And so definitely I would be aware of that. And my supervisor supported me in making sure I wasn't in some super not so great parts of town after dark. And so it was a safety concern, so I think that can definitely be considered in there as well, but we want to try to make them as times acceptable to the family as much as possible. I know that's not ever possible, because there are some caseloads I've even had where families worked all day, and so the only time they had to work to visit was in the evening. Well, when you have 10 families that want evening visits, that doesn't work out so well either, especially when you've got to schedule around dinner time and all of that stuff. So the point is to have that conversation, document that conversation, and make sure it's documented somewhere. I think, to me, the place that makes the most sense is that in that enrollment paperwork. What days and times work for you? What's your schedule like? Who do you want to have at the visits? And then, but then the other piece would be to updating that as necessary. So if primary caregiver wasn't working when they enrolled in services and now they got a job, okay, now that you're working, what seems to work for you? What, if you're working, second shift, okay, do you want to visit in the morning? Whatever that conversation looks like. So, and then updating that, that whatever it was, that you filled out about the acceptable times for the family. And then of course, it always is going to be documented in the contact notes, like what time your visit took place at. So, I had a visit November 18th at 9 a.m. with a family. So that then the peer reviewers are able to make sure that that's, if there's questions about like why they said dad wanted to be there, but dad couldn't be, hasn't been there for however many months, or whatever. There's kind of a paper trail to follow on that one. Standard 6.03, visit the frequency, intensity, and duration of services are based on the family's needs, strengths, and circumstances, and are appropriate to the types of services offered. Break that down here just a little bit. So frequency, intensity, and duration. There's no really, like, I wish there was like a set description on this one. I wish we defined it better in our standards. I wish, frequency means this, intensity means this, duration means that. And I attempted to try to do that. And I'll be really honest with you, I couldn't. Frequency, I can pretty much nail down. How often are the visits? Are they weekly, bi-weekly, monthly? How long does each visit last is kind of the next part I got to. So it might be based on the needs of the family, or how many children are enrolled. Some programs do a thing, it's called like special services. So they see a family maybe even twice a week, if that family is really high needs. And so that could also factor into intensity as well. Like, that it's usually a temporary situation in those situations. But if you've got 3 kids that are all under the age of 5 and you've got to be doing, developmental screening, and there could just be a lot going on with that family. So maybe the visits are for 90 minutes instead of 60 minutes each time, or whatever that would look like. And then really, how long do you have to work with the family based on the program design? So if it's a program that enrolls children, that works with children 0 to 3, and a child enrolls at 2, and maybe there's a lot of needs for that family, having a year to do that is different than a program that's 0 to 5 and having longer period of time, 3 years to do that. And so that's part of that duration, but then it's also helping you to decide if you need to increase in frequency or intensity, to be prepared to close that family for closing as well. So it sounds like 3 different things, but really we're just kind of looking at a couple of things, like how long are the visits, how often do they occur, and then that last piece, like considering how long we have to work with this family if they were going to stay in as long as they possibly could based on the age of the child. Most discharges are based on age of child. Like they're going to preschool or they go to kindergarten, if they stay enrolled the full time and don't close early. So, and then the other piece, how is the family's needs, strengths, and circumstances evaluated? Is the family's needs, strengths, and circumstances reviewed with the family? It should be. And then how does the program ensure that all families are evaluated the same way here? So, because again, we're talking about how frequently are visits, and we're talking about considering needs, strengths, and circumstances of the family at the same time as frequency, so that they're that one depends on the other. And so making sure that the families have some input in that one, and that all family support professionals are kind of doing this the same way. In peer reviews, we would call making sure all peer reviewers look at the evidence the same way. It's iterative reliability. It's the same kind of thing here. That definitely it's a purposeful conversation with the families, but also that all families are treated objectively, and that it just doesn't come down to a family support professional like, I like working with this family, I'm gonna go see them every week, and maybe there's another family that they don't maybe so much like working with, or maybe they live a long ways away, like on the edge of the county that you work in or whatever, and so maybe they don't have visits as frequently. Like, it can't be based on those things. And then again, how is the needs, strengths, and circumstances documented? Lots of programs, the way that they do this is like through a risk assessment, which is fine. I like that. But a risk assessment done for the family is not done with the family. So you also need to involve the family in the discussion, especially when because part of this is strengths-based. We really want to be talking about including the strengths in there as well. And so it's important for families to have an opportunity to weigh in on what they feel their strengths are, and then, what their successes, and where they want to go with things, where what they view their needs as. Because sometimes there's a difference between what a family thinks their needs are and what, family support professional or staff supervisor even might think the family's needs are. And then so the bottom piece is just kind of that tying it together. The other thing I would say is a lot of times I hear in these like, well, we visit with families biweekly. That's what we're funded for. And so this is true. I understand that you have to balance program design with this standard. But I think the place to make that, if you will look back here at the standard, it's balancing the realistic, the real world of the funding to the needs of the families. And so maybe you have a very high needs family that comes in that has a lot of gaps in their knowledge about child development. And there's a lot of education and work to be done there. And you can only visit that family biweekly. That's really it's not going to change any of the frequency or the intensity or the duration, but it's going to change what you do with the family. It's going to maybe mean that the focus of your visits are a little bit different. And so that's kind of the other piece that comes in here. We would want to see policy and procedure that if the reality of it is that you can only see a family every other week or biweekly, that your policy and procedure should kind of address then what changes you will make or what interventions or those kinds of things that you would do with the families based on their needs, strengths, and circumstances, then to how that can be changed to make sure that you're meeting the family's needs. That's kind of like a vague kind of thing I'm thinking about, but I want to make sure to talk about a little bit. If you have additional questions about that, talk to me about it. Talk to Leanne about it if you're in TA, and I think we can get you some additional support and resources on that. And the big piece on 6.03 is documentation is the key. And so I know everybody's tired of this phrase. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. But I had to throw it in there mostly because that kid's cute and I like his attitude. But in this standard, it's really so important. Where is the initial discussion with the family about frequency, intensity, and duration of services documented? Where are the changes in these documented? Where are discussions with the family documented? We talk about all these things in TA. I'm not always sure that it's clear to peer reviewers, some of this. So we want to make sure that the best practice would really be that the peer reviewers don't have to guess at anything. They know where to find this information when they look at a participant file. They know what the kind of expectation is for documentation, and that they're able to make sure that they know where to go to get everything. They don't have to ask in the meetings. How often do you visit with this family, or how often do you visit with that family? It should be really clear in everything. Peer reviewers are going to compare those dates of those case notes to how often. So, to how often you say the visits are going to occur for each family. So they'll take a look. If you say, we talked to the family, we decided weekly visits, they're going to look at those last several months, going back at least 6 months or at the most 6 months, and make sure that that's happening. They could write the standard out of adherence if that's not happening. And, the one big caveat here is that sometimes families, you're not able to visit with a family every week because of illnesses or scheduling or whatever, cancellations, that kind of thing. If a family support professional can't meet with a family for a reason, or a visit gets canceled, or the family's out of town for an extended period of time, that has to be documented. Maybe one of the single biggest pieces of just like programmatic advice I could give programs is make sure those things are logged, because otherwise, and I have this kind of down here in the consider this piece. If you were a peer reviewer and the family was supposed to be weekly and found that there wasn't a contact note for a family for a whole month, how would you know what was happening? How would you know that if it was that visits weren't taking place? How would you know if visits were taking place and just weren't documented? How would you know if the frequency had changed and maybe it just didn't get documented somewhere? Or how do you know if the family was unable to visit due to an illness or being out of town? Because some of those, different scenarios mean that a particular piece of a standard might be out of adherence. Whereas, if the family was just out of town for an illness or whatever, if you just write that down, that's easy for them to follow the paper trail and know what's going on. And that doesn't, then it's not something that's the program is not doing. Um, it's really easy to just look through contact notes and find gaps and see, oh gosh, they haven't visited with that family in 2 months. What's going on there? Like that, it's very like, I don't know how to say this out of any other way other than having done it, but like, you look at those dates and it's really obvious. They're like big flashing neon lights that say, look here. And so then that is that kind of that cause for concern, and start to ask questions about this kind of stuff. And so if you couldn't figure it out based on what you've got in the contact notes or what the supervisor has seen in the contact notes, then likely the peer reviewers wouldn't either without that, because they're not going to have that contextual, like, oh yeah, this is what's going on with the family. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Peer reviewers won't know that. This kind of sums everything up in that how you want to add things to the procedure. Describe who participates in the discussion when determining frequency, describe when that's talked about and updated, describe how it's discussed and how the family is involved, where everything is documented, and then really it all ties back to service philosophy, your program service philosophy. Everything that you do here you should be able to tie that back to somewhere in your service philosophy that's like, yep, this is where that impacts service philosophy. This is that piece. Places we've talked a lot here about where things are documented: enrollment forms, contact notes, forms documenting change in frequency, forms used to assess risk, forms that you might document the family, where the families, the conversation with them about needs and strengths and concerns. And then I'll kind of end things here today with this quote that I found, and I'm drawn to quotes about purpose, because I feel like purpose is something that is valuable and I lose sight of sometimes. And so I always, when I feel like I'm losing sight of something, that's how I refocus myself. And so this is one that really speaks to me: is purpose drives the process by which we are capable, by which we become what we are capable of being. And I think for family support, it's true for the work we do. It's true for the work that families do. It's such a parallel process. It's true even, within IFSTAN, the work that you do through TA and getting ready for the peer review. If we really, you find yourself getting stuck sometime, just sit down and think about it. Like, why am I doing this? What is the purpose for this? And hopefully you can find that purpose, and it'll help you refocus on what you need to do and focus on the things that are the important things. So with that, do we have any? I'm going to stop the recording